Hey guys, before we get started here, it's worth pointing out that I am not an expert at this. In fact, I have almost zero experience painting or any of the stuff you're about to see in this video. So keep that in mind as you're watching. I'm sure I'm going to do a lot of stuff wrong. Hopefully a couple things right. And with a little luck, this doesn't turn out too terrible. And we all learn something in the process. So I'm going to start getting set up here. I'll do my best to kind of narrate what I'm doing and let you know what tools and materials I'm using, and hopefully you can get something out of this. So here we go. Good morning, guys. I'm getting set up here to hopefully at the very least get a coat of epoxy primer on some of these parts. This here, there's really only two parts I care about how they turn out. The rest are kind of practice, or I had them laying around, so I figured I might as well see what I could do with them. So we've got the engine cover here for the Superhawk, and then hanging up over here is the fuel tank for the Superhawk. That fuel tank is not the original. The original is over there on the shelf. It's all bashed up. This is an earlier model that had the crossover tube on the bottom. I'm just going to plug that off. Everything else is the same. This one is in much better shape, no dents, and the surface is pretty good. It's got, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, it's got these teeny little kind of rust pits. I don't know how the primer is going to fill those, or how well the primer is going to fill those. So if we get a coat of primer on and they're still very visible, I may put painting this off so I can get some glazing putty and fill those. I'm not under any illusions that this is going to be some kind of show quality finish. I have zero experience painting with an HVLP setup, so I would be happy if this looks good from a couple feet away. I don't think all the prep in the world is going to make me a perfect painter all of a sudden. So we're just kind of going for good enough for now. If it looks presentable, and the bulk of the tank is covered by the chrome panels anyways. Those do look great because I had them re-chromed several years back. So just need it to look good enough, I guess. And then this, I have a silver that I'm going to use. It's not quite as close to the silver that Honda would have used. So this is another one where I'm just kind of trying to get to the point where I can enjoy it for the summer. If next year I hate it, I'll strip it back, I'll paint it again. So it's not that big a deal, they're not big parts. These are, so this one is the original right side cover to this Superhawk. This is not the original left. This was a secondhand one I bought on eBay. The original, this whole area is rusted out where the little knob goes through. These are the original side covers to the CB160. And as you can see, I started to media blast this. And whatever this blue paint is, it's incredible. This little area right here took me about 15 minutes, where the paint on these, I stripped an entire one inside and out in 15 minutes. So I made the decision, I'm gonna epoxy primer over this stuff. Again, this is just practice. It was not worth spending what would have been hours to clean these off. I already have new old stock side covers on the 160, so it didn't make any sense to spend any more time on those. So it is another very humid morning here in Pittsburgh. It's about 95% humidity, lots and lots of fog. So I'm going to have to wait a few hours for some of that to burn off. But in the meantime, while it's still relatively cool out, I'm going to get my makeshift paint booth set up, and I'll just do a time lapse of that. And then I'll go over some of the the material I'm using here. You can see a little bit of it. Everything I have paint wise is from Eastwood, including the paint gun. It wouldn't matter if I had very, very expensive paint or and this has decent reviews online, but again, I'm not a professional painter. I wouldn't know the difference anyways. So we're gonna give this a shot, see how it goes, but I'll get the rest of the stuff out here shortly and get things set up and take you along for the ride. This is one of those videos where I feel like I'm obligated to say that this is not a how-to. I have, other than a couple years ago messing around with a paint gun when I first bought it, I have no experience whatsoever. I haven't even opened up the cans of epoxy yet. So I've never painted with this stuff. I'm just kind of following the sheets that Eastwood provides and just kind of hoping it turns out halfway decent. So again, this is not a how-to. There are far better resources, far better painters out there you should be watching on YouTube. There's plenty of stuff. I've watched a lot of it. Don't follow what I'm doing. It could very well turn out to be a disaster by the end of the afternoon, but I'm going to take you along the way either way, and we'll see how this thing turns out. Alright guys, here's a quick look at the paint booth. Like I said, it's just a 10x10 Coleman pop-up or easy up or whatever you want to call them, with some 4mm plastic sheeting. I just have a big roll. It's like a 10 feet by 100 feet, and we go in here, and it's just held up with these kind of clamps at the corners, and as long as the wind stays down, this will be fine. And then if I can back out far enough here, my paint rack is actually a paint rack. This is from Eastwood. I can't remember. I think it was under $100. Kind of a handy little thing to have. The problem I have is just I don't have a lot of space to store it. So it's one of those things that I use very rarely. Almost never for anything related to painting. The last time I used it as a backdrop for a tarp when I was meaty blasting the CB160 engine outside. Just about, I'd say 8x8 kind of floor space here. By the time you factor in what you lose with the plastic sheeting here, it's going to be more than enough. I may put a little trash can in the corner with a piece of plywood on top for a makeshift table, just so I'm not running back and forth into the garage. I am set up right outside the garage, so it's not like I have to go far. So just waiting for the humidity to drop a little bit. Temperature is actually okay. I think we're approaching high 60s to 70 degrees maybe. So I don't want to wait too late in the day. I'm not sure how hot it's going to get today. Alright, so I'm going to walk you through my setup here. For air, I'm using my old, I think it's a 33 gallon Craftsman air compressor. It's just barely going to be enough power for this thing. It has a lot of trouble keeping up with this Media Blast cabinet, and even certain air tools, but it's what I have, and we're gonna do our best with it. It's not like I'm painting a whole car. This is, I think, Eastwood's original Concours gun. I think they've released kind of a sequel to this. And the reason I bought this was, number one, the price, and number two, it's supposed to run on quite a bit less CFM than a normal, I guess, higher quality HVLP gun. So, like I mentioned a minute ago, I did mess around with this a couple years back when I first bought it, and my compressor combined with this gun seemed to do okay. So either way, it's what we have, it's what we're using. And then just the various kind of painting supplies, I guess. I'm using their 2-part epoxy primer. And then I have Eastwood's Boulevard Black single stage urethane. I don't know enough about any of this to mess around with reducers and this and that. So we're going to just kind of go middle of the road. I'm going to use the medium speed activator. I think by the time this humidity burns off, we'll be within the 70 to 80 degree temperature range that this specifies right on the bottle here. Everything else is pretty straightforward. Tack cloths, cups, filters. Looks like our temperature and humidity are, well, humidity's coming down, temperature's coming up. So I think we're approaching kind of as good as it's going to get today. So I'm going to go turn the air compressor on. It'll take about 15 minutes to fill up, and then I'm going to start getting things set up. Alright, I'm about to start getting set up here. The first thing I'm going to do is wipe everything down. I've got some old t-shirt here, and to clean any kind of wax and grease that might still be on there. I did this yesterday. I'm going to go over everything one more time just to be sure, but I'm using this painting prep stuff. I just sprayed on the rag, wipe it down, and then just keep kind of turning the rag over, so that each time I'm using a clean portion of the rag. So I've got these parts here, tank is hanging up here, and then more side covers over there. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to start getting the air hose and gun and everything set up. Alright, I got things wiped down. I'm glad I did this a second time because there was still quite a bit of, I don't know if it's dirt or grease or whatever. Certainly dirtied the white t-shirts up a little bit. So as I was going off screen in the time lapse there, it was because I was actually spraying the rags outside and then bringing them back in and changing gloves every now and then, so I just wasn't transferring dirt from one part to another. But it left, not surprising, I don't know if I can focus, little t-shirt fuzzies. So once I get things hung up to get ready to spray, I'll go over everything with a tack cloth to take the little fuzzies and any dust that settles. The next step is going to be to tape off the filler neck hole and the petcock bung on this thing so I don't fill the tank with paint, and then get stuff hung up and then start mixing the primer and getting the gun set up. I want to take a quick second and show you a little trick for media blasting, especially engine cases. I just pulled these out of the tank, but basically any threaded hole, no matter how clean you think you got it, like free of grease or anything you think might kind of cling on to blasting media, it's never as clean as you think, and it's impossible. Even if you're flooding these things with brake cleaner, trying to get all the grease and grime out, there's still some in there. It's going to grab onto the abrasive. When you go to run a screw or bolt back in there, you're going to crush it and possibly ruin the threads in the aluminum. So after making that mistake the first time, I started plugging holes with just really short and cheap Allen head screws with an O-ring at the base. And what this is going to do is seal any kind of grit or grime getting into all of these little holes. So these are just, again, the cheapest. They're not even zinc plated. I ordered these online from somewhere. And then same with the O-rings. You can get hundreds of them for just a couple bucks. And I always go a size down because you want these to fit pretty snug. So for a 6mm screw like I have here, I'm using 5mm O-rings. And typically I'll just throw them away because they're going to come out with a bunch of crap on them. And if you go to do another engine or another part and you use them and they're covered with stuff, well, you just did exactly what you're trying to avoid. You just shoved a bunch of blasting media into that next hole. So I do this. I've got them all different sizes, 6mm, 8, 10, just so I have them on hand whenever I need to media blast something. And just get short ones. You don't have to run them the depth of the hole. You're just trying to plug the hole off. So in this case, I just threaded it in there, and the O-ring is going to form a seal, just finger tight, and that's going to keep all of the blasting media out of these threaded holes and make your life a lot easier. Alright guys, here's where we're at. I've got a little whip hose here running into my first oil and water separator, and that is then going to a 25-foot hose out to another 25-foot hose, and then got another oil and water separator here on the gun. And I just checked everything for air leaks. I hooked everything up. I adjusted the gun pressure to roughly where I'm going to want it. So at this point, no air leaks. I'm going to double check. Looks like our humidity is back up here, or at least we've got a decent breeze, but in this it's kind of working against us. I mean, the point is to eliminate the breeze, but at the same time we've kind of collected some humid air in here. So I may roll this plastic up for 10 minutes or so, let some of this sticky air get out of here. 68%. Seems like it's probably too high. I'd like it being closer to 60. I had this just a few minutes ago outside of the tent and we were at about 58%. So, and it's still relatively early in the morning, but the sun is up high enough and it is just, it's hitting this corner of the canopy here directly. So it's getting a little warmer in here. Alright, first attempt spraying primer. One thing I realized right away is I don't know how to properly adjust the gun, but I kind of figured out the lighting's terrible in here. Fortunately, I brought in this board to kind of do some initial spray outs on, because I was way off when we got started. But kind of got it where I think it was okay. But it's, and I wish, let me see if I can get the, where do I need to be for this lighting? Come on. See if we can get it to focus here. I don't know what this dries like. I've never actually sprayed this. I'm assuming it would dry matte. It's a primer. So we'll have to see if this evens out as it dries. If this was the top coat, I would be a little bit more concerned. But again, these panels here are for testing purposes only. The first thing I realized as soon as I started to spray this thing is this hanging method is not going to work for these really light panels. And I started to spray and the whole thing kind of flopped out away from me. So I'm going to let these kind of hang here for a few minutes. I'm going to go get a cup of coffee and then move on to the next parts. Probably 600 or 700 more of these things and I'll be halfway decent at it. Hey guys, I managed to get a first coat of primer on everything. I won't really know how it turns out until it dries. I'm able to look at it in better light. But in typical Pittsburgh fashion, the 10% chance of rain turned into a definitely gonna rain. So I'm gonna clean the gun up here before it really starts pouring on me. Give these last parts here maybe 10 or 15 more minutes to kind of start to dry a little bit, and then I'll bring them inside and we'll see where we're at that point. I got my gun cleaned up. I'm gonna have to wait and see what the weather does to decide if I'm gonna try to do the second coat today. I'm definitely not gonna get to the top coat today, and that much is clear. This is taking quite a bit longer than I expected. And I'd actually like to, once I get this primer on, I mean, I'm assuming I can just sand this primer if I need to. But the top coat, I think I need a little bit more practice. So I get the primer, since everything is still set up over there, assuming we don't get too much more wind with this storm that's blown over. And so I'm going to do my best to get a second coat on. I may or may not film that. It's not going to look any different than what I filmed already in the time lapse, so I might just do it, get it done. Alright, I just wrapped up the second coat of primer on everything. The tank's still hanging up here, and let me see if I can. We're gonna have to take a look at this once it dries, and we'll bring it in the garage. The lighting in here is just terrible, but One thing you might notice on the ground is a lot of paint drips, and I can't say for sure if it's something I'm doing wrong or something wrong with the gun, but the needle doesn't pop back into place. So what happens is you release the trigger all the way, and the needle should slide all the way forward and stop the flow of paint. Well, it gets hung up about halfway, and then the gun just keeps dribbling paint out. And I didn't realize this initially. I mean, it's not supposed to work that way. I'm going to get out of the tent. The wind's making it too noisy. But so obviously that's not the way that's supposed to work. As soon as you release the trigger, it should cut off the flow of paint, and away you go. But so initially I didn't notice that was happening, and I did see on some of the side panels especially, big droplets of paint had hit and kind of stuck there. After the first coat dried, you could see it was just big blobs of paint stuck on there. So this time around, knowing that was happening, every time I would release the trigger, I had to smack the side of the paint gun with the palm of my hand to get that to release. And then before I would spray towards any of the items I was painting, I kind of had to clear the gun out by just kind of spraying off at the side of the paint booth. So that certainly did not help matters. I need to do a little research there. It could be any number of things. And again, I'm not ruling out that the possibility that I'm doing something wrong. I don't remember this happening when I played around with this gun a couple of years ago, but it's certainly happening now. And with the primer, it's not a big deal. I can sand that anyways, and I probably will have to, just looking at the surfaces so far. But for the top coat, that's definitely going to be a problem. Alright guys, it's a couple days later here. I wanted to give this primer plenty of time to dry before I moved it, and just wanted to kind of show you where I'm at with the issues I was having with the gun and some of the rust issues on the tank that I'm going to have to address before I think about doing the top coat. So I'm going to see if I can zoom in here on what I'm assuming are kind of the paint that had built up on the gun because it was kind of dribbling out because the needle wasn't going back into place after I released the trigger. And then the next time I would pull the trigger, it just kind of blasted that collected paint all over the whatever I was painting. So let me see if I can get zoomed in here. There are a couple spots that are real bad, and then a handful of just little spots that'll have to be sanded out. So right here on the engine cover, you can see what looks like little looks like the surface of the moon, little craters there. And those were from the first coat of primer where those paint splatters hit and just kind of collected, and then of course the second coat I painted over those. But so there's probably one of the biggest ones there. And the other thing I noticed, I'm assuming from the same problem, is there's these little kind of glossy spots, and what that is it's just a extra kind of blob of paint there. So there's these small ones, and then you can kind of see right there in the middle of the screen that dark spot, and then next to this, if I can get it to focus, you can see all the little kind of rust pinholes and stuff like that. I mean, they're not holes in the tank, but imperfections of the surface. That I knew about. That has nothing to do with the primer or the gun. I just wasn't sure how much filler I was going to need. So it looks like there's nothing too severe here. So I'm going to just go over this in the next video with some glazing putty. Then we'll get that sanded back and then go back over it with another coat of primer. And hopefully at that point I'll be ready for paint. One thing I have decided, I will not be using that Eastwood Concours gun going forward, because between my lack of skill and the gun acting up, it's just a recipe for disaster. So I am going to do a little bit of research, order a different gun. I've been looking at a couple. Paint guns seem to be, it's like asking somebody on a forum, what oil do you run? And everybody's got their own opinion, and anyone who disagrees with them is automatically wrong. So I'm just going to go by, number one, price. I don't want to spend a fortune on this, and see if I can find something with decent reviews and hopefully kind of a shallow learning curve, because I don't plan on doing a lot of painting, but I would like this particular project to turn out. And if it means spending a little bit of money on a better paint gun, then I'm willing to do that. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.